The newest Tales from the Pizzaplex book is starting to make its way early to shelves, and I can't get my hands on it yet. I'm trying my best. My Barnes & Noble usually puts it out early, but they haven't yet, so I can't find it. But some very kind folks in the community have been posting screenshots and summaries of the book, so I know what happens. And this FNAF book is huge. I'll definitely be making a few videos on some of the stories, but I want to start with the epilogues, specifically what it tells us about Burntrap. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. So what exactly happens in this book? Well, I'm not going to summarize all of it, because frankly, I would just be plagiarizing summaries I've already read, like the one ID's Fantasy put on Twitter. Go follow her, by the way. Instead, I'm just going to go over what's important for today's discussion, including some of the info from the past books. So, spoiler alert for these books. We'll start with the most recent book, Tiger Rock, specifically the epilogue within it. Now, for those who haven't read any of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, the epilogues follow an endoskeleton named the Mimic and how it kills a bunch of people. It begins with the endoskeleton arriving at the construction site underneath the Pizzaplex, specifically at the FNAF 6 pizzeria. A few construction workers were given directions to take apart the staff bots that were littered around the place, but one of the construction workers notices that the Mimic has specific good programming on it and decides to program it to take apart the staff bots and pile them up. And it does this pretty well. It saves them a lot of time. Unfortunately, he didn't put a stop function in it. So once it runs out of staff bots, it turns to the construction workers and starts ripping off their heads and limbs and putting them in a pile. The first story ends there. The rest of the epilogues follow a group of teens that break into that pizzeria to try to sneak around and then have to survive. The teens begin getting killed off one by one, but throughout this process, we learn a lot more about the Mimic. We learn that an entire line of them was produced by Fazbear Entertainment. They were made to fit into any animatronic costume and could be programmed just by watching things and, well, mimicking them. It was supposed to be a cost-cutting measure, but they were discontinued after they recreated human interactions in unexpected ways. In Tiger Rock, we specifically hear about one of them mimicking hide and seek, and that it learned it long ago. This could imply that it saw one of the missing child incidents and started recreating that, but we're not sure. In another story, The Mimic, we learn even more about it, that the original one was made by someone named Edwin Murray, and it was built to recreate the actions of his kid, David, so that his kid would have someone to play with. But after David died, Edwin beat the Mimic senselessly and infected it with agony, which is why it does its daily chores, but in a violent way. Oh, goodbye. So much hair. Back to the present, and at this point we just are left with Kelly and Lucia. All the other teens are dead. They get the idea that if they hide in animatronic costumes, the Mimic might not notice them and will just walk past as they try to escape. Eventually, the Mimic walks past and they put this to the test. It works for a moment, but the Mimic takes interest in what Kelly is wearing, a blue dog costume, and it decides to put on the costume, crushing Kelly inside incredibly violently, like vividly violently. This is a very violent series of books. It's likely that this fusion could have caused Burntrap. The current speculation says that this is how Burntrap was made, fusing into Kelly's corpse. Now, there's more things from these books that I do want to talk about when we theorize, but I'll bring them up in context. So for now, let's take our ingredients, mix them together, and see what kind of theories start to form. Right here is where I need to make something very clear up front. This isn't a woe is me thing or anything like that. This is just getting ridiculous. Until the games have good, solid evidence of any of the characters in these epilogues existing, then I don't think saying confirmed, keyword confirmed, not probable, not likely, not I'm speculating, not even I think or believe, saying the word confirmed, I personally think is a little strong. You can theorize that the books are in the continuity. Obviously you can. You can make assumptions they are. You can personally believe it 100%. I'm not stopping you. I have no horse in that race if you want to believe that. But nobody, and I mean nobody, has the right to dictate to anyone else what they can or can't believe. I personally don't see strong enough evidence to link the characters from the epilogues to the games yet. I'm willing to change my mind on that. I just personally would like to see some in-game evidence of Kelly or anything like that before I go assuming that they are 100% in the same continuity. And guess what? That's my right to, because everyone is allowed to disagree with whatever they want, including me. That's totally fine. This is a theory channel after all, not a fact channel. It doesn't affect you, so be kind and move on. It's wild that I have to say that about a Pizza Bear game, but here we are. That being said, currently, I personally believe that these books are functioning in a similar way to the novels, albeit a lot more closely connected. The Silver Eyes novel trilogy gave us additional context and information about Five Nights at Freddy's, while telling a different different story. They gave us methods and rules for this universe. So, what are the Tales books trying to give us? Well, specifically for this theory, I think there's definitely a recurring theme in these stories of merging the lines between animatronic and human, synthetic and living. And a lot of people have been picking up on this blended boundary in these stories, from things like Billy trying to be an animatronic in B7, or Astrid being turned into an animatronic by Nexie, and even now with the possibility of the Mimic fusing to Kelly in this horrific incident. I think one of the things that these books are trying to do is tell us how Burntrap came to be. However, I don't think that that's just what the endgame for the epilogues will be. Here's why. First off, I don't totally see how crushing somebody's body with an endoskeleton could turn into Burntrap. Burntrap looks deliberately fused together, they are intertwined and laced around, but Kelly's death seems more accidental and chaotic and just brute force, rather than a surgical connection. Second, and I've mentioned this before, I don't personally yet see any direct evidence or indirect evidence of Kelly existing in the games, let alone being Burntrap. Do I think it's possible or even likely that this just kills Kelly and this Mimic endoskeleton later in the epilogues becomes Burntrap? Totally possible, totally likely. But I don't yet see how Kelly becomes our main antagonist of Security Breach. It's weird video game storytelling, especially because the stories themselves in the Tales books already gives us a way more plausible version of Burntrap's creation in Nexie. Now, this is one of the 3 stories in the last book of the series, Nexie. Well, the story is Nexie and the book is named after it, so they're both Nexie, technically. It's one that I think was overlooked because it mostly seems pretty separate from anything important in the FNAF games. It feels like one of those stories that they just add onto the book to tell a fun, cool, spooky story. Because, admittedly, on the surface, it does seem rather unimportant to the grand scheme of things, but I actually think it's very important. So, spoiler alert, but I'm going to catch you up on the summary of Nexie. Not super in-depth, but at least the important points like we did for the epilogues. Essentially, it's Ron's gone wrong, but violent. Okay, but seriously, Nexie follows the story of a poor girl named Astrid who wants a buddytronic. It's a 2.5 foot tall plush with an endoskeleton and programming inside of it, so it's basically like a walking and talking living doll. She finally is able to get one, but as it's being built by the weird automatic Build-A-Bear machine they have, the storyteller starts going haywire. The machine almost breaks, but it does produce a doll, a malformed, coldly staring, not quite right doll. But Astrid loves it anyway and takes it out. When the doll starts to look around and gain consciousness, it notices that many of the kids at school pick on Astrid and the doll for looking undesirable or ugly. Astrid assures her that it's what's on the inside that counts, but the doll is certain that both of them are ugly and both of them could be better. Days go by and the doll gets more and more obsessed with looking conventionally attractive. It also becomes more and more violent in defending Astrid. Eventually, Astrid caves, and the doll convinces her to sneak into the animatronic spare parts room in the Pizzaplex and build them a new endoskeleton. Specifically, build the doll a conventionally attractive, correctly proportioned, larger endoskeleton. And she does it pretty successfully. But when the endoskeleton is built, the doll doesn't use it. Instead, the doll kills Astrid and fits her body around the endoskeleton, making her into a weird, living animatronic. Okay, now do you see why I think this book is so important? We literally get a person being surgically grafted onto an endoskeleton. This is how I think Burntrap was made, in a way. Not literally this story, but this method. It would certainly explain things like how the body and the endoskeleton are so entwined. At least it explains it a bit more logically than just brute force. There are still some issues with this though. First off, how does the Mimic come across William Afton in the first place? And when it does, how does it know to just put on the suit rather than do literally anything else with it? And furthermore, there's still the issue of things not quite lining up between Burntrap and the Mimic, specifically in physical description. Things like parts of the spring bodysuit being there, or the eyes not being the right color, the head not looking new, etc. Some things just don't add up still, like how 77.8% of you watch these videos but don't subscribe because it's free and it really helps out the channel. Thank you very much. So how does this all add together? What do I actually think happened before Security Breach? Well, let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. As Glitchtrap and Vanny begin to prep the Pizzaplex to become their hunting grounds and laboratory, Glitchtrap, otherwise known as the Mimic 1 program, knows that it wants to perform two actions. One, it wants to recreate what it's been seeing and help Wanted, and two, it wants to re-enter the physical world, so it can do that. So what better than the endoskeleton that the Mimic 1 program originally came from? The Mimic. Vanny and Glitchtrap have it shipped to the Pizzaplex through the same DLZ shipping company that they shipped most of the animatronics from. You can see that connective tissue in this FNAF video. They then bring it down to their base of operations, the old FNAF 6 pizzeria. Therein lies the remains of William Afton. The Mimic sees that old, burned, barely put together spring Bonnie suit, and it tries to put it on. It mashes the body, nearly destroying the corpse inside. Vanny, still believing that she's loyal to Afton, not really knowing about what the Mimic is at this point, realizes that the corpse of who she's trying to follow is being destroyed. She needs to salvage this. Carefully, she grafts this mess together to preserve whatever was left of William Afton. Just like Nexie, she fits this body onto the endoskeleton, and it's then that the Mimic is fused with William Afton's body, creating Burntrap. This explains one key detail that still doesn't have a very clean explanation: the difference in eye color. In the novels, the eyes of the Mimic are always described as big and white, crystal clear, but Burntrap clearly has large black eyes. This is that explanation, because when the Mimic and William fuse, the Mimic is infected with William's agony. For those who don't know, the books introduce a substance called agony. We know about Remnant from the games and books. It's essentially soul-made material, this silvery substance that can be infused into animatronics and give them life. The books delve into the idea of the yang to that yin, agony being the strongest human emotion, infecting objects all on its own, typically turning them pitch black. We see this with Shadow Bonnie in the books, or with Blackbird, or even Shadow Bonnie in FNAF AR, in where agony is called Dark Remnant. I think William's agony is the reason why Burntrap's eyes are black. And when all of this is said and done, Burntrap begins to recharge and goes into that charging station that we find him in. Or I'm wrong, which is super possible, especially with Ruin around the corner, which, by the way, if you wanted to know what I think happens in Ruin, go ahead and click that video. As always, a huge shout out to the Toasted Slices, the best channel members around. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, Slices.